It's 4 a.m. on February 24th, 2022. Almost exactly 8 years ago, Russian special forces had annexed Crimea. Now, Moscow is about to reveal to the world that it was not satisfied with just the peninsula. Soon, thousands of troops are going to storm into mainland Ukraine. For the next 2 months, Kyiv is going to be put to the test. At stake, Ukraine's entire coastline, and, by extension, its own self-determination. If Russia is successful, Ukraine will become a landlocked country, stuck between choosing whether to forego its export businesses or submit to the mercy of Moscow. Even if the capital survives a separate assault up north, what happens down south will decide whether Ukraine continues to be a functioning state, or is doomed to be a throwback to yesteryear and claim the dubious crown of the sick man of Europe. This is the battle for the Black Sea. Prelude: Russia's objectives. It will be a long time before we know with any kind of certainty, but through observation and conjecture, it is safe to conclude that Russia had 3 main goals along the coastal front, one each for the corresponding directions it could go. A northern injection was the base step. Almost immediately after Russia annexed Crimea, Ukraine responded by cutting Crimea's access to fresh water for agriculture. With the capital in post-revolutionary chaos, this was one of the few feasible countermeasures. Indeed, if you zoom in on basically anywhere in Crimea, it becomes obvious that agriculture is one of the pillars of the peninsula's economy. But local rainfall and the corresponding small streams are insufficient for the level of production that Crimea was accustomed to. Instead, the peninsula relied on water coming from the Dnipro River via the North Crimean Canal. This was not a problem when Crimea was an autonomous republic within Ukraine. But when Russia annexed it, Ukraine took the obvious countermeasure by damming the canal. The fields correspondingly dried up. Along the northern sub-axis, Russia's most basic goal would be to destroy the canal dam. But to guarantee long-term control over the water flow, Russia had to travel further north to Nova Kakhovka. This was the site of the same named dam. Unlike the makeshift dam from earlier, it was permanent, an infrastructure project from the Soviet era. Critically, the reservoir it created also provided the water level for the canal. And to further secure the area, Russia would want to control Kherson as well, a population center of just under 300,000 that served as the capital of the oblast. Recapping the northern sub-axis: Step 1, open the canal. Step 2, control the canal's access point. And Step 3, capture the corresponding population center. From there, Russia had 2 more major objectives heading in the perpendicular directions. East was the bigger priority, so we begin there. Prior to the invasion, Russia already had de facto control over parts of eastern Ukraine through the self-proclaimed Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics. The main prize was just west of Donetsk's control, the city of Mariupol, population 425,000, and best known for its steel industry. Reaching that far and uniting the 2 fronts would completely cut Ukraine's access to the Sea of Azov. Ukraine already struggled to sail from there given Russia's control over both sides of the Kerch Strait, but this would completely end that discussion. Speaking of the strait, the Crimean Bridge was another motivation for the eastern sub-axis. Opened in 2018, it was the only affordable way for Russia to move supplies into Crimea, due to Ukraine sealing the land border. The completed bridge was an upgrade over Russia's earlier makeshift resupply strategies, but it was still asking a lot from a single piece of infrastructure. The eastern sub-axis's goal was to create a land bridge to the peninsula. Along the way, Russia would be interested in controlling the territory at least up to the Dnipro River, as the water provided a natural defensive barrier. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Europe's largest, would come with that. 2 other major cities were on the way. Melitopol was an important crossroads and could serve as a logistical hub. Meanwhile, Berdyansk was another valuable port and also had a series of highways leading from it. Recapping the eastern sub-axis. Co-Step 1. Take Melitopol and the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Step 2. Move to Berdyansk. And Step 3. Unite with forces from the east to capture Mariupol. The western sub-axis contained Russia's more ambitious goals. The first step would be Mykolaiv, another oblast capital, and a city of 470,000 people. Mykolaiv was most famous for its shipyards, and so militarily critical that it was closed to Westerners until the 1980s. In fact, the Moskva, the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, was built there in 1983. This, of course, was the Soviet era, with Slava, meaning glory, serving as its original name. The ship got around. It was a veteran of the Russo-Georgian War of 2008, the annexation of Crimea in 2014, and the Syrian civil war at various points. And now it was about to see further action. After Mykolaiv would come Odessa, Ukraine's third largest city, with a population of more than 1 million people, and affectionately known as the southern capital of Ukraine. After a success here, it would be a hop, skip, and jump to eliminate Ukraine's entire Black Sea coastline. But in all likelihood, that was not the final stage of the Kremlin's master plan. A little further west of Odessa is Transnistria, a skinny region within Moldova. Decades earlier, the Moldovan Soviet Socialist Republic attempted to break away and become an independent country. The eastern portion of the territory resisted. Moldovans were the ethnic minority there, and many Transnistrians wanted to stay under Moscow's rule. Thus began the Transnistrian War. Russia's 14th Army intervened, ostensibly as peacekeepers, but in practice bolstering Transnistria. The end of the war mirrored what would happen 16 years later in Georgia, with Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Transnistria remained a de jure part of Moldova, with only fellow unrecognized entities recognizing it. But it was actually a de facto independent state that relied heavily on Russian protection. And if you ever forgot about the complicated relationship, Transnistria's co-national flags were there to remind you. Technically, they do have different aspect ratios. But more to the point, the Russian 14th Army never left. If Odessa were to fall, then Transnistria would become an officially annexed part of Russia. To recap the western sub-axis. Step 1. Take Mykolaiv. Step 2. Move to Odessa. And Step 3. Unite with the 14th Army in Transnistria. Overall, Russia's plan was simple. Go north. Then go east and west. Make Ukraine landlocked, and expand Russian borders as Moscow saw fit. Act 1. Russia's Foothold. To be blunt, Ukraine and the still-suited Zelensky were not fully prepared for what was about to unfold. While the United States was adamant that Russia was serious about invading, Kyiv was more skeptical. Preparations were still happening, but Ukrainians were not yet mobilizing in large enough numbers. The thinking went that, if Russia were to invade, surely it would just be an escalated version of the war that Ukraine had been fighting in the Donbass for the 8 years prior. As such, the bulk of Ukraine's soldiers and materiel was in the east. When Russia invaded and made public Putin's more prodigious plans, the priority pivoted to protecting President Zelensky and Kyiv. A sizable number of forces stayed in the Donbass, but that left the south as the odd man out. Thanks to that, when Russian troops departed from Crimea at 4 a.m., they did not waste any time. Within hours, they had captured the Canal Dam. Water would soon begin flowing to Crimea again. By 6 p.m., the Moskva made progress toward a future goal by capturing Snake Island, a speck of land in the vast Black Sea. Despite its size, It was strategically important if Russia wanted to put naval pressure on Odessa. Only 19 soldiers guarded the island, though, making it easy pickings. The Moskva radioed them and demanded their surrender. The responding soldier said, "Russian warship, go have fun by yourself," a line forever immortalized on this commemorative stamp. But verbal barbs are not Neptune missiles. Furthermore, as we have discussed before, since Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, Ukraine had essentially lived with no navy of note. With Ukraine having no backup in sight, Russia quickly captured Snake Island. The next day saw another significant Ukrainian loss and further Russian progress elsewhere. Having broken the canal dam on the day prior, Russia pushed up to and captured Nova Kakhovka. That meant control over the main dam that fills the canal. It also gave Russia the opportunity to begin contesting the road and rail bridges that lead into Kherson. Heading east, Russia focused on the coastline. Troops initiated a battle over Melitopol, Russia's potential logistics hub. But the real pressure was zooming right past that. On February 26th, Russia captured Berdyansk. That meant that full control over the Sea of Azov was just one Mariupol drive away. Meanwhile, after a slow couple of days in Kherson, Russia tried bypassing the city altogether, sending a dozen armored vehicles to make a play against Mykolaiv. Not greeted with the hero's welcome that they were hoping for, the Russian invaders came up empty. However, the next 3 days would produce significant Ukrainian losses. On March 1st, it was the fall of Melitopol. On March 2nd, it was Kherson. Mariupol was also surrounded that day. Although Ukrainian troops would hide out in a bunker until May 20th, Russia had effectively monopolized the Sea of Azov. And on March 3rd, Russia captured the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The Kremlin's dominoes were falling into place. It appeared that Ukraine might lose its southern tier. Act 2. Ukraine cleans house. Back in Kyiv, the reports coming in from the south raised some serious questions. The capital was still under imminent danger from the infamous Russian convoy, but the panic from the first few days had subsided by this point. And while the war planners anticipated that the South would see significant losses as the price to pay for punching Russian troops out of Kyiv, the speed and the extent of Russia's gains came as a surprise. The main failure occurred on day 1. Ukraine was not oblivious to the possibility of Russia using Crimea as a staging ground for a southern offensive. Correspondingly, over the prior 8 years, Ukraine had planted a minefield along the line of control. But without a significant defensive presence there as well, the minefield alone could not hold back a Russian offensive. Rather, it was designed to stall an attack and delay any real crisis in the south. However, what actually happened is that Russia ignored the mines in its sprint through Kherson. How that happened successfully was unclear, but Kyiv had 3 theories. First, Russia just got lucky and killed the Ukrainian soldiers responsible for arming the mines before they could complete their task. Second, Russian special forces penetrated the area prior to the attack and disabled the system themselves. Or third, a Ukrainian traitor gave away the minefield's locations or intentionally refused to activate it. The third possibility represented a disaster for Ukraine, but even the second suggested inside help. The Ukrainian Security Service, abbreviated SBU, went on a crackdown. The first step was arresting a Kherson commander, suspected of relaying information about the minefield and coordinating Russian airstrikes. The chief of Crimea's SBU unit was also arrested. Zelensky further cleaned house by firing the head of the SBU, Ivan Bakanov. This was less about suspected impropriety, Zelensky had known him for decades, and more that these problems occurred under Bakanov's watch. Ukraine's mistakes went beyond the first day of the invasion and extended to missed opportunities to blow the bridges leading into Kherson. Even though one was a critical dam, the road bridge was independent of the water system, and thus could be destroyed without causing a catastrophe downstream. But Ukraine was not about to repeat those mistakes. Proactive sabotage was now the order of the day. Ukraine even scuttled the flagship and the only frigate of its hollowed-out navy, worried that Russia might succeed in Mykolaiv and press it into the service of the Russian navy. Interestingly, while Ukraine was cleaning house, Russian soldiers started looking for any house or other type of shelter with heat and food. Russia's logistical problems are much better known due to what happened in Kyiv, but it was not much better in the south. Russian troops carried few provisions, the Kremlin evidently anticipating that grateful Ukrainians would feed them along their way. Armies march on their stomachs, and while the situation would improve once Russia consolidated control over Kherson, the whole situation belied a deeper problem that was going on further to the west. Act 3. Ukraine strikes back. Kyiv's new strategy would limit the options available to Russia. Having crossed the Dnipro to get to Kherson, Russia still faced a north-south crossing along Mykolaiv to get to Odessa. Ukraine made sure that bridges would not be an option there. Earlier on, Ukraine had also laid a minefield around Odessa's ports to prevent Russia from staging an amphibious invasion reminiscent of D-Day's Normandy landings. Thus, Russia's only clear strategy was to capture Mykolaiv and plan for a slow plod out to Transnistria. The key to this was Kherson International Airport. Think of it as the southern equivalent of Hostomel, which was pivotal to the failure of the Kyiv offensive. Despite its name, the airport was small, accommodating only 1% of the yearly traffic that Kyiv's main airport accounted for. Russia had captured 2 other airstrips in Mykolaiv, but these were too close to safely land planes, given the active combat operations in the city. Ukrainian artillery ensured that Kherson International Airport turned into a metallic graveyard, inhibiting Russian resupply efforts. And in contrast to the earlier betrayals, Mykolaiv's locals were calling in the positions of Russian soldiers. With Ukrainian reinforcements arriving in numbers, Mykolaiv was now off of the table. Russia briefly attempted skipping the city altogether and heading further north, endangering another nuclear power plant. But that only placed further strain on Russian logistics. By mid-March, Russia had no choice but to pretend that Mykolaiv did not exist. However, capturing Mykolaiv and such were not entirely necessary for Russia to landlock Ukraine. If Russia could solve Odessa's sea mine puzzle, the southern capital could still fall. The precursor to any Russian landing was a steady bombing of Odessa. But as long as Ukraine's artillery survived, the blue and yellow could keep Russian ships from getting too close. Nevertheless, true offensive operations to destroy the Russian fleet faced a significant hurdle. Without a navy to engage Russia at sea, Ukraine had to rely on long-distance missile strikes. One slight problem: the Moskva's radar and anti-missile systems shielded the rest of the fleet from serious consequences. As long as it was still floating, Ukraine could not make any real progress. But Ukraine achieved a breakthrough on the night of April 13th. With an assist from a Turkey-supplied drone, 2 Neptune missiles snuck past the Moskva's defenses and hit the flagship. Worse for Russia, the corresponding explosion detonated the Moskva's magazine. The ship began listing to port. As the clocks turned past midnight, it would soon find itself at the bottom of the Black Sea. Ukraine had gotten its revenge, served at a cold 0 degrees Celsius, the temperature of the Black Sea in winter. Without the Moskva's protection, Russia's remaining fleet was vulnerable. Command made the decision to retreat to the safety of Sevastopol. Russia's last remaining option was to use Snake Island as an unsinkable firing position and continue to rain down explosions on Odessa. However, Ukraine relentlessly struck any Russian attempts to set up shop there. By June 30th, Russia was forced to retreat from the island. Ukraine was all too pleased to return and raise its flag. Ukraine's access to its Black Sea coastline would not be denied. Epilogue. As successful as Ukraine was at halting the Western advance, combat in the other vectors proved to be a harder challenge. Ukraine would not see significant gains again until November, when a counterattack pushed Russia out of Kherson and south of the Dnipro. However, the river proved to be a formidable defensive barrier. The June 2023 destruction of the Kakhovka Dam only made the problem worse, with the evidence pointing to Russia blowing it up from the inside, ostensibly to shore up defenses further to the east. Ukraine hopes to make further progress in its 2023 summer counteroffensive, but that remains to be seen. If you want to know more about the invasion, you will love my book that examines the causes of it. Check below for more information on that. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care. Here's an interesting correction from the last video. I suggested that one day Sweden hopes to raise its flag next to Finland's at NATO's headquarters. Taken literally, that is not quite possible. The flags are not aligned by order of entry, but rather alphabetically, and specifically using the French names because, well, that's how the United Nations does it. Moreover, the positions are not permanent. Every Sunday at midnight, bless whoever staying up that late, the flags rotate one position, so no country can claim they have the most favorable real estate. You can thank Eisenhower for coming up with that idea. But here is the interesting, or at least awkward part. As it stands, Sweden would find itself next to Slovenia and, Turkey. Stockholm can only hope that Switzerland one day changes its mind about the whole neutrality thing. Also in that same video, I created fake NATO, or NAFO. Commenters pointed out to me that there were better alternative names, including NAFO, I am also disappointed, I can't believe it's not NATO, and the Mid-Atlantic Treaty Organization, or MATO, where all of your mates go.